was a lovely June day on Gosling Farm. The haymaking was over, and the barley harvest would not start for several weeks. Yet Stan and Little Red Tractor had been dashing around at full speed all morning. Patch, who was resting in the shade by Little Red Tractor's barn, was puzzled. What was all the rushing around for? Morris the moleman's battered old van drove quickly around the corner and screeched to a halt in the yard. Hetty, the big brown hen, who laid the biggest and brownest eggs on Gosling Farm, ran off, squawking her disapproval. "Morning, Patch," said Morris, as he took a bag from his car and hurried over to the hay barn. What was going on? Why was everyone in such a hurry? Patch trotted after Morris to find out. "Good morning, Stan," called Morris as he walked into the barn. Stan was sitting on a straw bale, painting a bright red line around the top edge of Jeremy's cart. "Morning, Morris," he said. "All the blue paint's dry. I've only got this line to finish, then I can leave you to do your fancy work, while I drive Little Red Tractor down to Walter's garage for his respray." "Do you want a lift back?" asked Morris. "No, thanks," said Stan. "I'll take Patch and we'll walk back across the fields. You've got enough to do." Morris nodded and reached into his bag. He pulled out a pot of yellow paint, a pot of red paint, a pot of green paint, lots of artist's brushes, and a stick with a pad of rag tied to the end of it. Stan finished the red line and watched Morris at work. Morris was painting a leaf and flower pattern on the side of the cart. "That's going to look wonderful," said Stan. "And so it should," said Morris. "This is for a very special occasion." Hetty the hen clucked as she wandered into the barn. Stan picked her up and stroked her back. "I think Hetty approves," he said. Stan placed Hetty gently onto a pile of straw. Hetty made herself comfortable and watched Morris at work. "Well, I don't know," said Morris. "I've had an audience before, but never a chicken." Stan smiled. "Hetty may lay you an egg if she likes your work, but I can't wait to find out. I must be off, or Little Red Tractor's new coat of paint will never be dry enough for work tomorrow." "Are you going to change his colour to sky blue pink?" asked Morris. "Of course not," said Stan. "That's a pity," said Morris. "I like sky blue pink." Walter was serving petrol when Little Red Tractor pulled into the garage. "Drive straight in," he shouted. "I'm all ready for you." Stan drove to the back of the garage and in through a wide doorway. As he got down from Little Red Tractor's cab, he almost kicked over a big can of paint. On the lid, in black marker pen, someone had written, "For Little Red Tractor." Stan picked up the can to look at the label and read, "Sky Blue Pink." "Is that the right colour for Little Red Tractor?" asked Walter, who was peeping from the doorway. "No, it's jolly well not," said Stan. Then he noticed the decoration around the edge of the label. It was a leaf and flower design. Morris had played a practical joke on him. "Just Morris's little joke," laughed Walter. "But don't worry, Stan. I'll give Little Red Tractor a good clean and a respray in Little Red Tractor Red." Stan and Patch took the long way home past Beach Farm and along the footpath to Stumpy's mill. Stumpy was looking out from the highest window in the windmill as they arrived. "Hello there, Stan," he called. "You come to look at the flags?" "Yes," shouted Stan. "I was wondering if there'd be enough for Little Red Tractor's trailer as well as Jeremy's cart." "Oh, I should think so," shouted Stumpy. "Catch!" Stan ducked as an enormous bundle fell towards him. But only one flag reached Stan, and it fluttered harmlessly around his head in the summer breeze. Stan looked up at Stumpy, who was holding on to the other end of the line of flags and grinning down at him. "That's the second practical joke I've had played on me today," he chuckled. Stumpy asked Stan to tie his end of the flags to a branch in the apple tree. "Do you think there's enough there for Jeremy's cart?" he asked. "Plenty," shouted Stan. "Catch this, then," yelled Stumpy, as he threw down another bundle of flags, but this time Stan knew what was coming and caught the flag. "Tie that one onto the shed door handle," shouted Stumpy. Elsie came out of Mill Cottage to see what was going on. "Oh, very nice," she said. "I've never seen the windmill look so cheery." On Saturday morning, when Stan and Stumpy draped the flags around Jeremy's cart and Little Red Tractor's trailer, Patch suddenly knew what all the rushing around had been for. It was the Wrigglesworth Carnival. When they arrived at Wrigglesworth, the children clapped and cheered. They knew that Jeremy and Little Red Tractor were there to take them through the town in the carnival procession. "All aboard!" shouted Stan. "All aboard!" shouted Stumpy. But as the children clambered onto the cart, Stumpy heard a clacking noise. It was Hetty. "Well, I never," said Stumpy. "Hetty's sitting on some eggs." "I thought you looked broody," said Morris, who had walked over to see what all the fuss was about. "You don't think this is Hetty's idea of a practical joke, do you, Morris?" asked Stumpy. They all laughed. "But we can't follow the parade with the broody hen in the cart," said Stan. "Don't worry," said Morris. "I've got an old box in my van. I'm sure she'll be comfortable in that." Morris fetched the box, and Stan gently lifted Hetty while Morris and Stumpy carefully moved the 7 warm eggs. "I think she'll be happy enough in there," said Morris, as he and Stan put the box into the van and quietly closed the door. The children cheered and waved as Jeremy and Little Red Tractor took them through Wrigglesworth in the carnival procession. Jeremy trotted with his head held high, and Little Red Tractor felt very proud as he chugged along, gleaming like new in his fresh, shiny coat of paint. Back at the sports ground, there was a fair, games, hamburgers and hot dogs, candy floss and ice cream. Eventually, it was time to go home, and as the children said goodbye, Stan and Morris carefully wedged Hetty's box between straw bales in the back of Jeremy's cart. "It's an important job, hatching eggs," said Morris. "And laying them," said Stumpy. "There's nothing I like better for breakfast than 2 boiled eggs with brown bread soldiers." 4 weeks later, Hetty strutted out from the hay barn, proudly leading 7 chicks. "One thing's for sure, Patch," said Stan. "If the hens in that lot turn out like Hetty, there'll soon be lots of big brown eggs on Gosling Farm, and a very happy miller at the windmill." There are hundreds of Hettys here, but they have plenty of space to wander. They can scratch for food and enjoy themselves before returning to the nest boxes to lay their eggs. The farmer cleans and grades the eggs before sending them off to market. As it starts to get dark, the hens return to their shelter, where the farmer shuts them in safely for the night. It was a hot July morning on Gosling Farm. Most of the pigs basked in the sunshine. The clever pigs, like Sydney, stayed cool. Sydney had found a splendid place in the shade between the pig sheds and the hedge to Top Acre Field. He'd also found a gap under the wire which he was slowly making bigger with his snout. When Stan and Little Red Tractor drove into the field, all the pigs, except for Sydney, ran towards them. "Come on, Sydney," shouted Stan as he tipped food into the trough. "If you're not quick, you'll miss breakfast." Sydney ambled over and Stan emptied the last bucket into the trough. Stan scratched Sydney's back. "You're a funny old chap, Sydney," he said. "The older you get, the funnier you get." Sydney grunted. He liked having his back scratched. Later, Stan and Little Red Tractor drove down to the river. The cows watched contentedly as they chewed the cud in Riverside Field. But on the river bank, the ducks waddled about, looking very unhappy. Stan stopped Little Red Tractor in the shade of Auntie Ellie's willow. Patch leapt out of the cab and soon found out what was wrong. She wanted to have a swim, but there was lots of weed and hardly any water. "Never mind, Patch," said Stan. "The boat should be coming to cut the weed soon. But how the weed will float away, I don't know. I've never seen the river as low as this." Stan left Little Red Tractor to cool off and walked along the river bank to Whistling Bridge. In the middle of the river, a big mud bank had appeared. "You'll never be able to swim in that, Stan." Stan looked up to see Dudley, the postman, looking down at him from the bridge. "I don't want to swim, Dudley," said Stan, "but it would be nice to see the ducks enjoying themselves. I've never seen the river so low." "It's Wrigglesworth Mill," said Dudley. "They're doing some repair work and the river's being held back until they finish." "Well, that's all very well," said Stan, "but I've got unhappy ducks, and goodness knows what's going to happen to the weed when they come along to cut it." "Now's your chance to find out," said Dudley. Stan looked across the river to see the weed cutter's truck moving slowly over the rough ground on Goat Common. Stan said goodbye to Dudley and walked back along the bank. "Morning, Steve. Morning, Paul," he shouted. "Morning, Stan," Steve called back. "What have you done to the river?" "My ducks drank it all," said Stan. Steve and Paul laughed. "It's a good job you don't keep camels," said Paul. "Will you be able to cut the weed with the river as low as this?" asked Stan. "The boat's no problem," said Steve. "It's got a flat bottom and doesn't need a lot of water to float in. The problem's going to be getting rid of the weed." "What usually happens to it?" asked Stan. "We let it float down to Wriglesworth Mill," said Paul. "We put poles across the river to trap the weeds in the shallows, then we lift it up by tractor." "Well, couldn't you put the poles across by Whistling Bridge?" asked Stan. "Then a little red tractor could lift the weed out for you." "That would be marvellous, Stan," said Steve. "That means we can cut upstream from here, right up to Talborough Mill." "You can put the weed on your muck heap to rot, then spread it on your fields," said Paul. "Very good for the soil." "Sounds like a good idea all round then," said Stan. "When do we start?" "Right away," said Steve. "We'll have this boat in the water in a jiffy. Then we'll shoot over to Wrigglesworth Mill to fetch the poles." Stan and Patch watched as Steve backed the weed-cutting boat down a shallow bank and into the river. Paul, who had waders on, helped the boat float off the trailer and pulled it to the bank. Stan waved as Steve and Paul drove off to Wrigglesworth Mill to get the poles. "Come on, little red tractor," said Stan. "This will never do. We've got the pig sheds to clean out." Cleaning out the pig sheds was hot and thirsty work, but Stan loaded all the dirty straw onto the trailer before he sat on Little Red Tractor's front wheel for a rest and a drink of lemonade. A hawk worked the hedge between the pig field and Beach Farm. Stan watched as it hovered and swooped and completely missed the large shape moving down the hedge behind him. Sydney had escaped. By the time Stan drove Little Red Tractor with his heavy load to the muck heap, Sydney was sauntering down the lane. An hour later, when Steve and Paul returned with the poles, Stan and Little Red Tractor were ready to pull them across the river. Steve tied them into position. Then Stan and Steve watched as Paul started the weed-cutting boat's engine, lowered the cutters, and began to cut the weed. "There is some time before all the weed floats down," said Steve. "Time for me to fix the forks onto Little Red Tractor," asked Stan. "Plenty of time," replied Steve. "And while you're doing that, I'll walk under the bridge to see what the weed is like down by Marshy Wood." "Cheerio for now," called Stan as Steve splashed through the shallow water under Whistling Bridge. Stan patted Little Red Tractor on the bonnet. "Come on then, Little Red Tractor," he said. "There's more work to be done. Let's go and put those forks on." But as Stan climbed into the cab, he heard a loud yell. Then Steve ran out from under the bridge and scrambled up the bank. "Whatever's the matter?" asked Stan. "You look as if you've seen a ghost." I have," stammered Steve. "It's under the bridge. It's grey and it's enormous and it makes a terrible snorting noise." "Well, I never," said Stan. "I've never seen anything like that under Whistling Bridge. Let's take a look." You can go if you like," said Steve. "I've seen it. I can tell you I don't I like it." "All right then," said Stan. "You stay here and look after Little Red Tractor. Patch will come with me, won't you, Patch?" Patch jumped down from her favourite place in Little Red Tractor's cab and ran past Stan and started barking. "What is it, Patch?" shouted Stan. Stan peered into the gloom. He could see Patch, but he couldn't see what she was barking at. Then he saw it. It was an enormous grey shape, struggling to get out of the mud. The grey monster lurched towards them, and suddenly Patch's tail started to wag. She stopped barking, and Stan began to laugh. "You can come down, Steve," he called. "It's nothing to worry about." Stan and Patch emerged from under the bridge, followed by a large, mud-covered pig. "Your ghost was Sydney," laughed Stan. "I think he's been rolling in the mud to give himself some protection from the sun." "A pig using mud as sun protection cream," said Steve, who was feeling a little bit silly. "Now I've heard everything." Sydney grunted and lurched towards Stan to have his back scratched. "Not now, Sydney," shouted Stan. But Sydney moved closer, and as Stan moved back to avoid the muddy pig, he stepped on one of the poles. His welly slipped along the pole. He swayed, did the splits, and fell flat on his face in the mud. Now it was Steve's turn to laugh. "I'll tell you one thing, Stan," he chortled. "You may not get sunburnt now you're using Sydney's sun protection cream, but I bet your face has turned a bit red under all that mud, eh?" "Ah, what's this? It looks like the real weed cutters. But I wonder where their boat is." "Ah, here it is. They left it where they finished cutting weed yesterday. They normally work with 2 boats, but here in the upper reaches of the river, it's too narrow. It doesn't take them long to get the boat ready." And with the engine started, Paul lowers the cutters and he's off. Weed floats downstream, where it's caught on poles in a shallow part of the river and pulled out by tractor. If the weed is left in the water for too long, after it's been cut, it will start to poison the fish. Keeping the rivers clear of weed is an important job, so Steve and Paul are kept busy all through the summer and well into the autumn. I think they must enjoy driving around in their little boats, don't you?
The air was sweet with the smell of honeysuckle and roses.
Come on, Smudge. Let's think of some mischief.
Chuckles had heard enough. She pulled the bottom of the lead rope to untie herself and silently walked up behind James and head-butted him. James went flying through the air